Recording.
Wow.
Hello, I am Chris Hanna again. This is Flip Johnson again. We're back to point out more crap in the world.
So, just to show how topical it all is, I wanted to show you what I was reading right before we got on. So, BBC article, I'm scrolling down, and then watch this concept creep happen. The headline is Violence as Protesters Rally for Women's Rights. Then you click on that, and the banner says Clashes as protesters demand end to violence against women. So there's a weird creep there where it's like for women's rights, well, okay, but then it switches to violence against women. It's like I don't know of a nation where violence against women isn't a crime. Like that seems to be settled. And then you go further down, it talks about a couple things in a few cities, and and they said, oh, here we go. There were also large rallies in Barcelona, Paris, and London to mark the International Day for the elimination of gender-based attacks. Because we
Yeah.
started out talking about women, we started out talking about women's rights. And this is all like I could do it, fit it all in a screenshot, you know? And like
Yeah.
look at that concept creep to where like, yeah, it's just that it's a whole Mott and Bailey happening, and it takes 20 seconds of reading to go through the whole thing to where we get from, yeah, we're protesting against or we're rallying for women's rights. We want to end gender-based violence. Is it as if gender-based violence is just a one-way thing? But yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. It's like I don't know because everybody thinks, oh, like my little sister tells me that I'm obsessed and I spend too much time on the YouTube, and that's where I get my alt right conspiracy theories about how people this concept creep is happening everywhere. But there you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just the YouTubes, but I mean, it's anywhere you look nowadays.
Yeah,
It, I mean, I think I'd have my same point of view just going down like my Facebook news feed and have for years. I said it on the other podcast with Kevin, but you and I and him and some other people, we share around these wackadoo things, and I even curb off of how many I share a day because I think there's too many of them,
well,
and it's like been 10 a day for 7 8 years.
and then the other part they don't ever talk about though is like, what do you mean violence? Because like so like when the Unite the White right guys when they announced that they're going to go demonstrate, a whole bunch of people that don't like them showed up to counter demonstrate, and violence ensued. I don't believe that in Barcelona and Paris that there's a whole bunch of people showing up to fight with the feminists against the policy
You,
of
you just reminded me of one of my bigger brawls with Lindsay Hansen Park and some of the people on her pages right after that Unite the Right rally. You remember there was that rally the next weekend in Boston, and that rally was for somebody who was running for Congress, and the person who was running for Congress was an Indian American, not
yeah.
not Native American, and he was an Indian American who was not at all, he was just on the right wing, but somehow it gotten floated out there that that somehow was another Charlottesville, and so all these people
Yeah.
went and protested it and had this big crazy demonstration for something that was not at all Charlottesville again, but they'd gotten so whipped up, and I was there on some sort of Lindsay's page telling them this isn't Charlottesville again. You guys are getting crazy. You guys are doing over the top things. And I remember somebody from the page like even took my screenshot saying you guys are going over the top and saying, here's look at what this guy says. This is an alt-right guy. That was back during the time frame of
Yeah.
everybody getting so punching Nazi, punching Nazi,
Well,
punching Nazi.
the
And
whole Charlottesville story is a great big gaslight
yeah.
because Charlottesville didn't happen because a bunch of right-wing supremacists had a demonstration. Because what should have happened, like if people followed my advice, if I heard tell that a bunch of weird white right outriders we're gonna walk in a parade and carry tiki torches, and there's a few dozen of them, maybe a couple hundred of them. We should have taken pictures, said what a bunch of dopes, and gone
No,
on with our lives.
that
And
was
then
one of
and
the
nobody would have even paid attention. Like
But
one of the things
that's
that
one of
makes
the
me
jokes
crazy.
about it. I pulled up around that time frame because there's something with Christopher Hitchens. I think he was guest hosting, not just the time that he guest hosted Larry King and had on those white supremacists, but on some sort of round table like with Charlie Rose. he'd mentioned that those rallies had been going on since all the way back in like the 2000s and 90s and the sort of stuff. Those little couple hundred people of like alt not alt-right, but I mean before the concept of alt-right even existed, because even that got co-opted.
Yeah.
Um, they they had been showing up in different little rallies forever, a couple hundred of them, as many as exist that aren't feds, which is like half of them.
Yeah.
But that was one of the moments that, because I remember sometimes when I'd comment on like a random thing just because I said you guys are being nuts about that Boston thing, some people would mention whenever I commented on anything else that they'd say somebody would just comment under it, Chris Anna thinks you shouldn't punch Nazis, and that's
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'd say, and then it could have been on like a different thread that had nothing to do with anything. And first off, no, as a liberal-minded person, I generally don't think just like a random Nazi until they're getting violent, you can't just randomly punch somebody who thinks that. But the bigger issue is that you guys are terrible at deciding who's a Nazi or not.
Yeah. No, nobody would know who Richard Spencer is if he
Yeah.
hadn't been sucker punched on live on camera. That
The guy who voted for Joe Biden.
Yeah, Joe Biden voter,
Yeah.
Richard Spencer. Yeah, no, like, because I mean, I remember when that all shook down. Is because like a couple people at work, were like, "Hey, check out this hilarious video," and that's things that, like, the other thing that bothered me is I watched the video where the interviewer says like, "Well, what do you think about these Nazis that love you so much?" And he says like, "I don't like Nazis. Don't like me. I'm not a Nazi. Nazi," and and then he gets punched in the face, and the narrative is Nazi gets punched in the face.
Yeah.
Like,
But not even that, like, even afterwards, they got to the points, and I did get in arguments with the whole other person that didn't have to do with the Mormon scene about them being bad at deciphering who were Nazis, and before long, they were talking about finding me at my work and punching me.
you know what?
But
Let
go
I
ahead.
want just let's tease a future episode because this is something I've wanted to do forever because I've done it on my own and it's hilarious. And that is, you can go to the American Nazi Party's webpage and they have a 25-point plan.
Oh, and find
24,
out what their politics really are?
yeah, 24 of those points sounds like Antifa.
Yeah, 24 of them, and 22 of them are right out of Karl Marx.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
but, the funny thing about that whole situation, it kind of ties back into our last podcast a little bit, that we were talking about how we're able to decipher out a little bit, and I've got the extended clips here today, is what we're going to go over, of why I can kind of point out to the critical theory angles that I think Larson now has, and I think Deline just pays homage to him. I don't think he thinks deep enough about him to say he's a full critical theorist, but now anybody of that politics falls into it, just kind of like any sort of religion, like every Scientologist you meet doesn't know about Xenu.
Yeah. And
And go
I
ahead.
just learned, I wish I could remember exactly how he put it. James Lindsay talked about how not every parishioner is a preacher, not every preacher is a theologian, and if you don't understand how that works, you don't understand anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
And go ahead.
I think I paraphrased it pretty close.
Yeah, that's good. And we were talking last podcast about how we're able to decipher this stuff of them, but you still kind of have to falsify it or go over it and review it. But I was thinking about one of the issues is that they think that they can like see in us, as we have for over years, and have been accused of the
Yeah,
dog whistles of being some sort of not liberal person,
yeah.
and they're terrible at it. Am I here announcing that I'm a bit better at deciphering what they are? I mean, I think I'm able to falsify myself if I'm wrong in something, but
You're walking awful close to the Anna Kasparian line there. Am I saying I'm better at this? Yes. Yes, Chris
well,
Hanna,
she was talking about she's a general better person. I
yeah, yeah,
think
no.
I'm a big piece of crap. But as
You're yeah, okay, so you're not morally more
I'm not,
righteous.
yeah, but
You're just better equipped to
I
tease
think
out
I'm
this.
more prepared to bring up examples of why I think you dog whistled the critical race theory than you'll be able to bring up examples of why you think I might dog whistle that I'm a Nazi that should be punched.
All
You
right,
know.
let's find out.
Well, so I'll do a couple things first. This is a everybody should subscribe or check out the Scribe Light channel. One of the reasons I think it's such a good channel and is because it's funny, first of all, but he goes over all of the TEDx universe that you do not want to sit and watch because you'll be bored to tears watching it.
I
But
haven't watched TEDx in close to a decade.
I've watched a ton of it because of Scribe Light. And Scribelight has these bingo games that he plays with TEDx, and you can see some of the examples here on the bingo games, and he listens to them. And I was just listening on Delenn's podcast a while ago. It was the one with all the English people on it, and they were saying, "Wow, it would just be better for you to go listen to TEDx talks than to listen to general conference or something like that because you're going to learn more things." Um, you and I have complained about general conference over the years, although sometimes there's pretty good just generalized precepts in there. But I don't think you'll get a good generalized precept out of TEDx.
That's
It,
that's why I stopped watching them. I'm just
it,
like,
it did at first, but it dwindled into what everything dwindles into nowadays, just complete ideology. And
yeah,
Scribe Light is not only good because it makes it entertaining or funny to go over them, but you can also see 100 different videos of how this stuff is just ubiquitous and nothing. Like I love like he goes over the stuff, and I think one of the reasons he's really good is because I think to cross off one of these things on his password, he's got to like really have an example. He's really studying it. Like does this count? Does this count as playing victim? Does this count as patriarch? As them talking about patriarchy? Does this count? But um, I would think one of my concepts that you and I should do is like we should make one of these bingo cards just for for the ex-Mormon blogging world because it wouldn't look very different. Some of these things would be
no.
there, but there'd be a couple things that you'd probably add,
I
like
mean, false prophecy. We could put that in there.
yeah. But they're for
Um.
sure gonna
Oh no! Wait, wait.
this one
We
right
could
here,
put in.
benevolent condescension. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah.
That one would just be marked off the list. There's so much, even just in the clips today, you'll see like we're just worried. We're so concerned about these Mormons, and no, like you can see like this duper's delight smile anytime they start talking about it. They're just indulging in how dumb the Mormons are and how such moral idiots they
Yeah. No.
are. And
Every time they drop old, white, and male, either together or separate, it doesn't matter. And every time they like, you see the little twinkle in their eye, like they just figured something out
yeah,
about.
look for that duper's delight. Yeah. um the I mean, this pops up today. I got a clip today. White supremacy pops up today. Toxic masculinity, weightless example, anecdote that probably never happened. I think we already covered one of those in the last podcast. But childhood or family anecdote. I mean, everybody's gonna do that a little bit. But
Well, Mormons. That's more part of Mormon life.
if you the TEDx talks when they pop in there, they're almost always kind of like, "What are you talking about?" It doesn't even have anything to do with like the story at hand, and they'll drop them in there. And that's when you start seeing that those almost all sound like Sunday school talks too.
Well, like, it's just like that the Sam Hyde hoax that he did at TEDx.
Oh, it's so
Because
funny.
part that
Wait,
makes it
your
work
dog
is
was
because it takes so because I mean the amount of time it takes both the audience that's there live and then you watching that video live. It's like before you realize, like, wait a second, it's a total goof, but like it takes a while because TEDx is so stupid
yeah.
that it's
The
hard to tell when some guy's just going in there to mess with everybody and when somebody's actually there to try to teach us something important about life in the
Well,
world.
that's a bit of the point of the hoax papers too, is that all these academic activistic things, it gets real easy to spoof them or hoax them because
Yeah,
it's not really based in any sort of rigorous activity. Although John Larson or Delenn will beat his chest about all the rigor because of the credentialism. People have these credentials nowadays. They do a lot of melodramatic pausing for effects. This mind reading one, this is one that I think about, like self-reflect on myself even because like there's some mind reading going on here in what I'm doing, and I do try to subscribe
yeah.
to the school of Scott Adams of don't mind read, but I think I have some pretty strong examples of things that I'm talking about, but I'm guilty of this a little bit. Uh, a lot of it. But um, takes credit for something. I don't think Larson does that, but Delaney. And I think his
Dylan
whole
does.
brand is like the money that flows, man.
Oh man, well, that I always forget his name. The Imagine Dragons guy,
Oh
the
yeah,
the gay Mormon
the
Jesus.
one who is sad for all the LGBT guys with his shirt off and listen to my music, and
Well,
I'm gonna cry to the night of.
well, geez, I mean, because that I remember you mentioned that documentary, because like because you know that I like bad filmmaking just as I mean, that's one of my favorite hobbies is watching terribly made movies, and I'm just like, there's no way I'd be interested in this crap. And you said something about like, no, you roll on the floor at just the lack of self awareness, and I really did like I just like out loud laughing, and and obviously it's the dead wrong reaction that you're supposed to get, but like this guy doesn't realize just how ah
Yeah.
you got to watch it, but like the like in that movie, like that documentary, they talk about
It's so
um
narcissistic.
it's well, it's so narcissistic, but then, like, because I remember that filmmaker, producer, something like that, somebody in the staff, their sibling, like their little brother,
Oh, yeah.
they straight, like, oh, he killed himself, and they
Throw it in
just
there
kind of
as it makes sense in the,
yeah, they just kind of roll in there, but it's just like, and then they just keep moving on about how we got to save the gay ones, and it's just like, what,
yeah.
your bias is showing, guys.
There was a I was gonna say something about that. Well, oh gosh. So in some of these clips, and I think I cut it out because my clips were getting too long. That was one of the things when I kept looking through them. Like in the very first podcast, I knew that he said something about like you see this in everything. So I just looked up the word "see," which is a very common word. So it came up 25 times, and every single time I came across the "see," well, that's kind of ideological right there too. Like all 25 examples across the whole entire thing, but um
Yeah,
they
so there's not example of John Larson saying, "I can see where they make a good point here," or
no, no, that wasn't one of them. Nah, once in a while he'll hedge off and stuff like that, but
yeah.
it's really funny. He'll frequently double right back in even harder right after the hedge. But um, the one of the things they bring up all the time is how most of the like the Mormon whenever Mormons go and help in some place, it ends up net positive for them. Their activism, when Mormons do charity, it ends up net positive for them. And some guy got excommunicated for supposedly, I don't know if that's true, for pointing that out. Does any of your all's activism end up net positive? I wonder. I don't know. I'm not a sociologist.
And wait, and so wait, the criticism is that the church goes out and does charity, and that the church's charity is kind of like Walmart's charity, where it's not really coming from just a
All
pure desire.
charity in the world right now is like PR for advertisement. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so rare. It's so, and I think that's one of the interesting messages from the Bible and from religion of that. It's anytime you're doing that, you've got your
No,
reward.
but
And
here's
I'd
this,
say that these guys got their reward too. You know.
but there's that Marcusian hatred for the system working. It's bad that it's a net positive. So even if the church's motivations aren't perfectly pure, it still benefits everyone.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
net
I'd even
positive.
say that sometimes because like, the church doesn't do much the reason you don't hear much about the church doing it, and I agree they could do more, especially with the money they have, although people are always kinda weird about understanding what assets are versus money, but they're gonna turn all their money into assets so that they invest, 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 but they don't do supersonic crazy advertising when they do give charity, you know?
Yeah,
At least not
they're
as
not
much as
like
Walmart does.
or Scientology, like Scientology, they're kind of legendary for how just PR their like I mean you can hear ex-Scientologists tell all the stories about how they'll gather up 50 Scientologists, put them on the yellow shirts, they'll set up the tent, there's 15 cameras there, Scientologist cameras, they take a bunch of very carefully staged pictures, and then all right, pack it up, let's go,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing happens all the time. But the church isn't nearly so cynical, I don't think.
This is just some receipts on that. This is that screenshot when Lindsay Hansen Park mentioned me as somebody who she was able to talk to when she came out of Mormonism, but
So
she wasn't very easy for me
exactly
to talk to
when,
when coming out of
because
kind of
that
stuff.
means that, like, if she talked to you in the past, that means that at some point in the past you were a person whose opinions mattered, and wasn't an undesirable alt-right man or woman hater like you must be now, because
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
obviously
because
someone
I
changed.
changed so much. I did change as far as like how much I was gonna like stand or just kind of stand by, you know what I mean? But
Yeah,
I mean, I think there's stuff all the way back then that I just kind of let fly and just be like, okay, okay, that's fine. Oh, they're trying to do well and that sort of thing. But
yeah, no, I mean, it's the perfect analogy is that, there's a lot of those people who are in the church who are just
yeah,
kind of, oh yeah, okay, and then eventually they realize, like, you know what, like, John Larson's own story was that when he thought about his daughters going to Sunday school, and that was the moment he was like, okay, well, I'm out, and it wasn't a big fu thing all the way around, and that's like, and the way we left ex-Mormonism is
and
the
then
same thing.
I also think, I mean, we have a clip of that if we get to it, but
Yeah,
you wonder if his kids are for sure in the right in in a better ideology or something now. But um
yeah.
this is one of the kind of interesting things. I had an incident. I I guess I'll talk personal stuff with my family yesterday, just in general, that politics came up, and
At
it's
Thanksgiving, no
Thanksgiving.
way.
Yeah,
You
but
didn't just watch football?
no, but it's my mom, and I love my mom. My mom's awesome and great, and some of her politics are different. Right, we can sometimes talk about them, we sometimes can't. We don't get um we don't get very like mean about it in any sorts of way. But she my Mormon parents are very blue and on. Huh. I wonder how that works. But most of their friends are pretty blue and on too, and the blue and on stuff that we talked about and criticized last time. But one of the things that I didn't mention, kind of wish I mentioned about some of that blue and on stuff, we sort of did. But so my mom brought up yesterday. I've got some other family members who are concerned about vaccination with kids, you know, and just in the middle of the conversation, she brought up the whole ivermectin thing and all that sorts of stuff, and kind of regurgitated the MSNBC line that that's horse paste or some sort of thing like that. One of the things about that is I had a very careful conversation with her a few weeks earlier that you know, complete nuance. Like you could say that the stuff doesn't work or it does work, that's all kind of up in the air. But no, like in the Joe Rogan situation, he was prescribed by a doctor and the stuff does, you know, yes, it is used for horses, but yes, it is also something that can be
Yeah,
prescribed for humans and has been for many different things. But after that very careful conversation, what my point is like 2 weeks later, it's just announced again, like at full hyperbolic levels at a family, you know, dinner. And I'm not saying that to say any sort of thing like my mom's some sort of bad person for it. What I'm talking about is even after going over a lot of those sorts of things, that's one of the I know Flip and I have had this problem with a lot of different people is that you can have like these careful conversations um, to go along with the thing that I did with Jonathan Streeter of the impossible conversations with people, and they'll even like go through the whole thread with you all the way down, and then just a couple weeks later they'll on some Facebook post just you know supersonic double down on the whole entire thing.
yeah.
And
I don't know how many examples I have of that, like,
uh, 10
personal
million.
friends, strangers, just everywhere. I mean, and the world at large.
Yeah,
I mean, we already talked about, like, the Rittenhouse thing, like, or the Covington kids is an even better example just because, within an hour, Reddit blew that story up. All the video was available. It was obvious that those kids didn't do anything wrong. Least of all the Nick Sandman smiley kid. Like his big mistake was to be white and have a goofy grin. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, that's it. It's like to this day, and that's the thing is again. I mean, you can play the tape. Well, it's like the fine people. You can make people read that transcript. You can make them watch that. You can and a week later, he called not what neo Nazis white supremacists. It's it's something called cognitive bias, which is something that John DeLynn knows all about.
well, I mean, John Dehlin, I make this joke. This is a bit of a brief summary. I'm not being precise, but like I remember he took his anytime he's sort of studying or reading something, he'd take like a selfie pic, and he took a selfie pic of himself reading Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, and I kind of like make the joke that like here I am reading The Righteous Mind. Aren't these Mormons stupid? And it's it's just like it's like an obvious thing that I don't think you read that too hard,
Yeah,
John Lynn. But this guy's an interesting guy. He's interesting on Twitter. He writes for Quillette, which Quillette isn't free of these problems. I guess no human is really free of these problems. His name's Rob Henderson, but he talks a lot. He calls the same thing that we called a successor ideology. Everybody kind of has their own name for it because the stuff is the nothing. So everybody kind of, when they start thinking about the stuff, kind of start inventing their own names for it. Like I invented, called it the nothing. But I don't know that anybody else calls it the nothing. That might be me. But um, the he calls it luxury beliefs. He calls the wokeness luxury beliefs, and the reason he calls it luxury beliefs is he kind of makes a lot of different arguments that a lot of these things, like maybe sometimes when my parents are going full blue and on, even like from a Mormon concept, they want to show that they're in, or that they get it,
Yeah.
and they'll even go back or like sit into things that or double down into things that are untruths, but they show that you have the right politics,
Yeah.
even if you show that you're gonna lie for it. And he's got a lot of interesting stuff, especially I'd go like through his whole old Twitter. uh,
Like the Mauritanian slaves today have no frame of reference by which they can understand the NFL as slavery. But everybody everybody with a college degree in America understands perfectly how that works.
so
You
so
know?
Flip here, like he was just mentioning, and I know it's happened to him. It's happened a little bit to me too. But there's the social consequences of our beliefs. I know that we've come across many different people that if you go debunking blue and on for them, they start fearing the social consequences of being a debunked blue anoner. You know what I mean? There's there's going to be a social consequence for you to say, wait a minute, no, maybe Trump wasn't Hitler. You
Yeah.
don't have to say he's great. Nobody ever said you had to say he's great, but it's pretty easy to say he's not Hitler, and but as soon as you say that, there's a social consequence for it. And then
Yeah.
if you even have like another friend who you kind of get to them agree to you in private, John Larson, about something being overly extreme, they're not gonna dare to out in public later talk about the agreement that they came to because of their fear of the social consequence of it.
Yeah, I've spent so much time thinking about like, what was it like? Because I'm just trying to imagine. I don't know, but like if it was like 1935 Germany, and you're having brunch with your friends, and you say like, I don't think that the protocols of Zion are real. I think that they might be a Russian forgery designed to foment racial, duress. Like, how would that go over in 1935 Nazi Germany? Like, we kind of know because those voices. Like, we don't hear about them, like, they weren't publishing opinion pieces in, the Reichstag Times, or I don't know, whatever it is, you know, like, and that's the thing is, like, and I realized, like, well, that's where we are now. It's like, literally just go around and say, like, I mean, I've had this experience so many times. And again, with, like, Nazi Germany, the same thing where it's like, you'd think people would be relieved to hear, like, "Hey, guys, good news. There isn't a secret conspiracy of Jews to destroy German
No,
society,"
nobody
you
wants the
know?
good news,
And
man.
that's the thing that's like when I tell people like, "Hey, there's good news. American police are not wantonly murdering young black men,"
What?
and you get the
F
reverse.
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Alright.
this was a great podcast. It was just on Wednesday. Um, this is Unsafe Space. All their stuff's pretty good. Carrie Smith
Yeah.
is one of our favorites. She's somebody who rethought her social justice cult, and Carter here has always kind of been on it. He's kind of more of a libertarian thinker, but it is kind of interesting because inside this community, you have both kind of conservative atheists. Even they even have a couple famous people who will check in, like an actor. I forget his name. He's in Dexter. But he's a pretty interesting libertarian guy. But the, the Carrie's a Christian. She's redoubled into Christianity, and Carter's an atheist. Um, he's not a Randian, but he kind of likes the Randian thinking, but he'll also back off of that where he thinks it gets religious. But
Yeah.
he did this whole podcast on this whole entire hour is worth listening to because it's very good, just generalized philosophy. And I think the generalized philosophy that actually is worth knowing. And I think it's the very basic stuff, like what is your axiom, what are axioms, what's the difference between inductive, deductive logic, how do you come to how can we define objectivity knowing that we are subjective beings? Um,
That all sounds like white supremacy.
oh my goodness, yeah. So it's very basic stuff about like figuring out like how you figure out meaning and that stuff in the world, and he's getting a little pushback in the inside of the same community because there's Christians, and he's not a Christian, but they're debating about it and they're friendly debating. But overall, they definitely know that against these other philosophies and ideologies, they're allies, to use that word. You know what I mean? Still, but this is a very careful case because I think even if you remain Christian or not Christian or any sort of religious belief, I think Christianity still lends to you being able to follow this sort of basic level philosophy of um how to decipher meaning and knowing the world. And he did a pretty good job here, just kind of laying out the very basic precepts. But I wanted to show a clip here of in the end where he kind of comes out firing at these other types of philosophies before we get into these other things. You hear it?
Yeah.
One note I want to say here before I wrap up: what we are doing, I've avoided calling this philosophy, and like
Again, I can't see you, so if you
I'm good.
okay.
I've been kind of trying for another word. I'm like, oh well, it's street philosophy, it's this, it's that. We're just talking about. The truth is, what we're doing is philosophy. If we're going to be clear with language, this is philosophy. The purpose of philosophy is to inform us how we should live on Earth. That's the purpose. That's what we're doing. Now, there's going to be a lot of people who've gone to institutions and studied philosophy that will mock these kind of discussions. You don't see it often here, but it does happen sometimes. They'll act like we don't understand the nuances of some patently absurd idea, right? Well, you don't get it. Kant actually, or he didn't really mean that you were born with these mystical ideas in your head. He really meant that it was evolution. Like it's just right. There's stupidity. They'll pretend like, oh, you don't understand the nuance. What he's really saying is this other gobbledygook, right? And or maybe they'll know some esoteric philosopher really well, and they'll be like, you should really read what so and so said about blah blah blah, and it's typically gobbledygook like Goethe, who sits in a dark room with his eyes closed and writes about light.
I like Goethe, but he's better. He's also a author. You know what I mean? Not just a.
Yeah.
But there's his point. His point is a great point, and there's much nuttier than Goethe.
And you'll see people say, you're not doing philosophy. And I thought about this one. And they'll say that because we don't let them get away with stolen concept fallacies, arbitrary assertions, dishonest deconstructions, like the analytic synthetic dichotomy. And they're actually right in one sense. We're not doing philosophy the way they've been taught. We're not destroying Western civilization and rational thought. We're actually doing philosophy because we want to discover the best way for people to live on Earth. And that looks foreign to people who studied philosophy in an institution. Because to them, philosophy is an armchair game of skepticism, right? The purpose of which is to confuse, tear down, and stagnate our thinking. So, them, when they make those comments. You also see people say, you're not a philosopher. Take that as a compliment, because when they say philosopher, they mean a sniveling purveyor of intellectual poison. We're not doing that. What we are doing is trying to discover the best way to live on Earth and save Western civilization, save what's good about it, and help give humans guidelines for living their lives and organizing society moving forward. That's what matters. That's the philosophy that matters. Not sitting around contemplating whether the ceiling exists because you're high, or writing about the whether words can manifest reality. That's not philosophy. That's like delusion. So let's keep exploring this stuff together. At least those of us who are married to the method of reason. Not because we're philosophers, but because we want to be the best humans that we can be. That's what we want. At least I do. So Andrew says best way is totally subjective. Yeah, great. So we have to have a conversation about that. What does that mean?
I like that last little bit because I mean it is one little like toss out to, so maybe there's some ideas that even if you can like reason yourself out of religion, maybe religion still leads to better ways. But Flip and I both kind of come from the standpoint of kind of atheistic reasoning, just like Carter. But I think we've definitely found, well, I'm not speaking for Flip, but some sort of circling back to understanding that maybe maybe the religious world or the Christian world uh, keeps people away from these super deconstructive nuttinesses as well. Maybe not, but I'm more just pulled this to for his great points about philosophy and how stupid philosophy can really get, and how much it is frequently turned into something that's just used to obfuscate everything and make it sound impossible and hard to follow, or like you can't follow it, or um I've been reading this stuff for 20 years, and there's always some sort of new concept, a new thing, new idea, new whatever, or even something that should have been a generalized concept that I didn't come across until recently. There's no way you can get into this world and not have somebody be able to throw something at you like you're a dupe because you didn't know this thing.
Yeah.
And most of it, I think anybody who's listening to this who kind of fancies themselves a philosopher or some sort of stuff, that I'm a little bit on a jag of being anti-super critic, but in that process, I got to be a critic, and we got to be critics, and so there's still critical angles in your life. But I honestly believe sometimes some philosophies you can't understand well until you start trying to figure out how it's full of shit,
Yeah.
and
No,
then when you go.
I definitely know that experience because, like, because you hear a lot of this stuff and you're trying to make it fit into reality. And it's just like you say, it's only when you give up the part where it's supposed to make sense, that
Yeah.
it's supposed to be something that's actually applicable to your life. Only then there's like, oh, okay, we might as well be in Star Trek universe or whatever. And in which case that's fun, and that's fine. Like
Yeah, you can
that's the
play
kind of
with it.
philosophy. Yeah. Like the way I remember you talked to me about, like, when you were in grad school and they talked about lenses, and like that's always made perfect sense to me, the idea, like, oh, let's look at this through this lens, and let's look at this through this lens, and that's a fun game to play. But you're supposed to take the lenses off at the end, and when you go back out into the real world, because and that's the thing, obviously, is like, if you take that feminist lens and you're driving home in it, all of a sudden traffic is is sexist.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could go right now, if we Google traffic is sexist or traffic has a sexism problem, I wonder how many articles we'll find.
Yeah. Well, beyond all that too is like if you go deconstructing this stuff, there's no end of people who will say you didn't quite understand it because you didn't quite tease out this word or this idea right. And I've got this clip from James Lindsay over here, and he's been through it left and right. And one of the deals with James Lindsay is he's trying to let the layman kind of understand this stuff better. And I've read the one thing I can offer James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose in this world is being somebody who's read a lot of the primary works too. And when I hear them regurgitate they're very accurate to what I also read. So I'm a witness, another witness unto the Lord. But some people say that as they tease it out or say different things about it. I have this pulled up because we're gonna listen to it and compare it to something that John Larson says in a little bit. But um, there's always gonna be people who can like come throw salt in your eyes, or especially in this world of kind of postmodern philosophy, that, oh, there's just a super nuance that you didn't nuance well enough, and I'm going to tell you what the nuance that you didn't get is you didn't agree. Like
Yeah.
that's the nuance that you're not getting. The nuance is where you disagreed. um so just mentioning that because this stuff's gonna, well, it'll get a little weird. But so I've got several different clips of Larson. I think some of them are just, the first three were places where he kind of just gets political, like going into more Marxist leftist stuff. And then I have like some more direct instances of him kind of doing the critical theory stuff. Let me see which one I want to do. You want to start with the CRT? We'll start with that.
Yeah.
Here we go. Should we hear James Lindsay set it up first, or should we hear him do it first?
I don't know. You
Because I can see it being valuable either way. Because you might need just to re-listen to this. What are we? It was 49 seconds. Okay, we'll listen to this first.
That's what critical race theory is all about. We could also say that it's a neo-Marxist strategy to make use of racial minorities to try to make way for a cultural revolution in America, just like Herbert Marcuse wrote in 1969 in his so-called Essay on Liberation. So that's another thing that critical race theory actually is. It is the attempt to use race to break open America for a communist-style revolution based now in equity rather than in pure communism. So critical race theory is pretty easy to understand. It's a belief system that believes that the ordinary state of affairs in our society is racism, that racism hides itself rather than gets better, has permanence to it, and it takes somebody called a critical race theorist to be able to find that racism, call it out, and hopefully bring us to a place where we can overthrow the entire system. It throws out the idea of step-by-step progress or incrementalism. It wants to overhaul the entire system in a social and cultural revolution that it's going to lead to bring us to a post-racial utopia that it hopes for.
Yay.
Yeah. No, I mean, like what he just says, you're, because it takes a critical race theorist, and that's things. A critical race theorist doesn't have to be somebody who's gone through years of education.
Oh, yeah.
You just have to be somebody who agrees,
You
which
need
is
like
a
a
lot like
day. You need a
Mormonism.
day
Yeah.
in this stuff to start acting
Well,
like you're some PhD philosopher. And
well, I mean, that's things like I would even say like Mormonism has a higher standard of membership than
oh yeah,
critical race theory, because Mormonism you have to at least wait a few weeks, you have to go through the lessons, and then you have to go and affirm the things are true, but like there's there's at least a waiting period, like to be a critical race theorist, which I mean a racial conspiracist, all you have to do is agree and affirm and you're in.
no.
You literally don't have to know anything.
But the second you disagree with anything, you're out unless you immediately repent for it. But
Yeah.
so let's listen to John here.
And I want to go full circle.
Keep going.
Whatever. This stuff is horrific.
Yeah.
The you can read, if you know where to read, about mutilated Indian bodies from
This is the right clip. Do not edit, Chris.
the 19th century. Like the things that were done
Desecrated graves
in the name of this stuff, all this teaching, it's
I don't know which exact example of graves he's talking about, but there's some criticism of that concept too, of like what those graves are, if you know. But I won't, unless you know something more about it. I'd just say
I don't remember specifically what he was talking about here either.
Well, there's those Canadian graves that just got dug up, and the actual like supposed Canadian graves, because they're kind of just going off of like what is that, spectral surveying stuff. But beyond that too, I mean, surely there was bad stuff that happened, but also like the concept of like a bunch of mutilated people tortured and murdered to death and put into graves is going to be an exaggeration.
gross. You saw us kind of like, before we even like jumped in, like hold our nose and say, listen, we're going to talk about some stuff here. So that's my point.
And the stuff in the past, it wasn't great, it wasn't good, but it's also probably better understood through somebody trying to be an objective historian than an activist, or people who are having discussed reactions to it, or
yeah. If history is making you angry just merely talking about it,
I've seen that posted so many times on ex-Mormon sites, and they don't know what, they think they're zinging some Mormon who's getting upset about history, you know what I mean? But
yeah, but like
they might
it just
say
tells. I mean, well, it's kind of like I don't know. The communist friend at work is always saying that I don't know the real history of capitalism, and that phrasing, the real history, like that betrays that, like, because it's just like, because that's the way Mormons talk, like, oh, you don't know the real history of Mesoamerican civilization, or it's like, and they're I can't think of the word, all of a sudden it escapes me, but they're it's implicit that they want to look back in history and they want to see a particular picture. And if they don't see that picture, they're unhappy, which is complete madness. History is done. You should look back as dispassionately as possible, you
Mhm.
know, and get mad when people lie about history. That's where I get angry, is when people lie about history, because it's pure Orwellian stuff. They're trying, you
Or
can.
make exceptions or readings into it. I mean, but people are gonna do it. One of these posts here, maybe I'll get into it right now, but like one of these is like them talking about how idiot Americans read into the Bible all this capitalism. And hate to tell you, there's not capitalism in there. And I've seen that sort of thing pop up a million different times on Facebook. But guess what? I hate to tell you, comrades. Guess what else ain't in there? You know what I mean? The, y- your Marxism ain't in there either. You know?
Yeah. Do you have that clip of Kara talking about, I like the socialist Jesus or something like that?
Yeah. Or talking crap on the Mormons who see capitalism in it, and then John riffs on it for a while. But let me keep going with this though.
Is you don't want to listen to me until you can deal with your own pile of disgust that I had to crawl myself out of too. I was raised in the 70s and 80s.
Quite the jump there.
Yeah.
I was raised in a culture of continual, perpetual white supremacy. And
No, I know that John Larson wasn't raised in a culture of continual white supremacy, because I am from that.
He's going to
I was
redefine
raised,
it.
what, 25 miles north of you
He's
a
going to
decade
redefine
later.
it. Yeah,
and what's funny about that word is it means that white people are supreme.
that's
I
what that
think that
means, huh?
Oh.
I remember Jonathan Haidt. I've tried to find the article because I thought he put it on his Heterodox University, but I couldn't find it there. I think it's somewhere else, but it was from Jonathan Haidt. It's somewhere around 2017 where he gave like the forewarning. I was talking in the last podcast. That whole concept of common sense being bad comes from Antonio Gramsci, which is kind of the father of turning all this Marxism cultural, and common sense being bad is one of the concepts of his hegemony, using the word hegemony. And when I was in school 15 years ago, everything was hegemony. And even when I first got into it, being the young guy, I didn't even kind of get what they were getting at with that, which is kind of just um, almost like a Marxist word for culture, bad culture. You could use the word
Yeah.
culture, but it's bad culture. And the common sense of that hegemony is bad and evil. But Haidt warned, I would say hate, and I think he goes by Haidt, but he warned in 2017, he's like, watch this year. This year is the year that they get off of the big word, hegemony, and switch it to something that's just more abrupt for as part of Marxist conflict theory to start making like ramping up the fight. And we're going to change that word hegemony into white supremacy, and he said, watch it this year, stand up to it, push back, but watch, it's coming this year. He had insight from the university that the big push to make the change was coming. And you can kind of just think of like now they want to do that conflict theory thing of jamming and changing the word, and now going from that schmackademic sounding word, we're gonna do this other one that has more cultural jabbing to it, And
Yeah.
John Larson would not have called it white supremacy 3-4 years ago. And now let's hear him describe it to us.
the word we oftentimes associate it with violent or extremist white supremacists, and that's not what Mormons are generally speaking. That's not what white America is generally speaking. But the ideas themselves have embedded that there is a pyramid of culture, there's a pyramid of who we should pay attention to, of who gets resources, of who gets water. We're looking at that distribution rights of water that's been promised to Native people. It's a big deal in Southern Oregon, Northern California right now. We haven't come across these issues, and that's because there's an underlying cultural meme or cultural element that white people are superior. They're smarter, they're better, they're faster, they're beautiful, whatever. And it permeates everything, and you won't see it until you do. And once you see it, you can't escape it. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to systematically say. And I know some of my conservative friends listening right now are like, why are you being offensive and calling me this? Because all were. And you know what? I have a deeper secret. We're not the only ones.
It's a deep secret.
Oh, but Homer,
deep secret.
John, no, people aren't. We're not saying you're being offensive. We're saying you're wrong.
Yeah.
You
Or
ja
or you're being like even the parts that are true, you're using it to jab in another area to then be wrong. Like uh, um
yeah.
you're doing this fast forwarding. Some people call it fast forwarding when they're talking about it. And the thing that James Lindsay said about there's no such thing as incrementalism. Even the incrementalism is just like a way to hide what was still always there.
Yeah. No, but like this, I don't recognize the world he lives in. That there's just always been there that white people are superior. No, in fact, the opposite. The only message I've ever gotten from family, church, and schools is that we're all, we're all created equal. We're all children of our heavenly Father. You
I
know,
I
we're
remember learning in this society before. I mean, I think it's first grade or second grade. I think I might be a weird person that I don't remember much about my super youth. Like I don't think I came online until like first grade or second grade, maybe a little bit in kindergarten. But like one of the first persons I remember looking up at on the chalkboard was Martin Luther King. And
yeah. No, I remember, I think first grade we went to the library, and the old librarian guy, I still remember him because I thought it was funny because he looked like Abraham Lincoln, and he showed us a picture of Abraham Lincoln and then showed us a picture of Martin Luther King, and that's where I learned about all that stuff. Um,
yeah,
uh, and yeah, and like at no point did he say, by the way, kids, like we're gonna let once all the brown kids have left the room,
yeah.
you guys are actually in charge. Just
There's
simply
a
never.
there's a this is one of the funny things that the obfuscators do. There's this guy named Charles Mills. I think he was in the 70s or something. And he wrote about like the white social contract or something that supposedly we all have this thing where we do have that agreement, kind of like the Eddie Murphy joke on Saturday Night Live that like that as soon as there's no black people around, we all loosen up and start helping each other out. And there's a theorist who really did write about that. But then one of the ways they obfuscate is like if people mention that as part of critical race theories, they'll say, no, that's critical race studies, not critical race theories. And they do that so much because like D'Angelo's not critical race theory, she's critical whiteness theory. And Kendi is something else. I mean, I forget like the way they dodge the nothing or say the Hydra has all these different heads.
Yeah, well, it's exactly like Scientology, where it's like, no, this isn't Scientology. This is Narcanon. This isn't Scientology. This is Wise. This isn't Scientology. This is Applied Scholastics. This isn't Scientology. It's a Delphi school. This isn't Scientology. It's the History of Psychology Museum. And there's like they just keep going on and on and on. But of course, like, no, it's all Scientology. You're not fooling anybody.
Yeah.
Like all of the concepts are there, all of the ideas are there, all of the language is there. You think that like it's literally it's like they think if they tape over the Coca-Cola logo, we don't know what it is.
So I might, I don't know for sure, but I might have spurned him into this because I was there in the comments and I made a super chat. And
Yeah.
earlier in the show, he'd said some sort of stuff about critical race theory is denying parts of racist history, like denying that those horrible things happen to Native Americans. And I do believe like there's a more nuanced view of that, but hell no, I'm not denying it. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I want to just know what the truth is.
This is one of
And
their lies is that there's any aspect of criticism of critical race theory has anything to do with denying racism.
yeah,
It's just and it's one of those things where it's like it's not a mistake, it's not a whoopsie, it's not a misunderstanding. They goddamn know better. And they don't
yeah.
care.
Or beyond that, to go with what your Marxist friend said, that we don't know the true history of capitalism
The
or the
real
true
history,
history of
yeah.
racism, that we didn't cover every single little ounce of every bad thing that ever happened to anybody. So we don't know the true history, but we did cover bad things that happened. I mean, I remember in the 7th grade, the first R-rated movie I ever watched, and I had to get permission from my parents, was the movie Glory, which most of these people will say is, if you get to like a real theorist, they'll say it's in some sort of way it's doing the interest convergence, like they're profiting off of it, John Larson. But they that whole movie is the whole entire thing is about how even in the North they were pretty racist
Yeah.
to the black soldiers, you know.
I mean,
And then
I
we all watched, we sat and watched Ken Burns' whole entire documentary, and this is still when, I mean, I'm so young, I'm still thinking I'm barely coming online, you know what I mean?
and this is where I'm to be more honest than the Johns are about this. Like I know like I met people like my age who, for example, were raised in East Texas. and they can tell me stories about, the stuff they heard growing up.
Because
So
they
like
have different rules about why the Civil War was fought.
that too, but like, so my point is like, I can concede, John, that like these ideas exist. Like, I'm not saying that they're not anywhere, but the idea that they're ubiquitous or normal in America and in my lifetime and yours, John, is not true.
Well, the underlying thing of D'Angelo and Kendi is the concept of did racism. You don't ask did racism happen. You say how did it manifest
Yeah.
itself there. And I think he's mouthing that same concept right here. That there was no incrementalism. It didn't get better. We're only not allowed to kill people anymore because of social pressure or something like that. But all the underlying racism is still there, and it's hidden. It's hidden, and you have to have a woke person point it out for you. Which, if John's saying he's that person or not, he's kind of starting to read stuff through that lens. But he could have done all this stuff before he got this theory up in his noggin. You know what I mean? He did go over the stuff, but now he's got to add in the critical race theory's lens to it and pretend like he didn't learn that somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
Okay.
Go spend a year in Japan, and you can learn about racism. So racism.
Tell us about racism in Mexico.
This is Flip's been one of the heavier culture jammers on this one that I've seen, because Flip knows a lot about. I hate to tell you, John Larson, because I know you could try to say that you're admitting to it right there, but I don't think you would admit to it if I held your feet to the fire in front of an audience, that the human race, which includes Black people, can also be very racist. And Flips brought a lot of receipts to that to people over the years.
I got a Lyft ride with a guy who was Dominican, and I wish I had video of it, because he started laughing so hard, because we got on the subject about how Americans talk about race, and like one of my favorite examples is that, like, if you took 50 Haitians and 50 Dominicans and put them all in a big conference room and then asked, a white guy from West Virginia, like, what do you see? You'll say, oh, I see about 100 Black people, but if you ask a Haitian and a Dominican, they'll say there's 50 Haitians and there's 50 Dominicans. and the Dominicans are building a wall right now to keep the Haitians out of the Dominican Republic, and it's just like, and I say this all the time, where it's like, because I mean, that's one of the things that always screws me up, is that, I talk to my American friends and they talk about Black and white as if these are like these settled concrete concepts. And I always talk about how, like, because I'm a Brazilian American, and like, there are people that, I mean, I'll give you the perfect example. The exact example that happened was that legendary, world famous soccer player Neymar. This was 5-6 years ago, before a World Cup. He was being interviewed by a journalist, and the journalist asked him, like, have you, tell us about how you've dealt with racism in your career. And he said, well, what are you talking about? Why would I deal with racism in my career? And the journalist says, well, because you're Black. And Neymar says, I'm not Black. Now, if you put a picture of Neymar, like, in America, Neymar is Black. In Brazil, he's not. And like, and also because in Brazil, because in America there's Black. It's just the one thing that covers all the skin tones. But like, in Brazil, they actually have words that they use to describe, and it's not necessarily racist, like anything it can be. But there's Black as in very Black, and then there's brown, and then there's
in Venezuela, my girlfriend's from Venezuela. In Venezuela, she's considered Black, and her dad especially, and she's not Black. But the Pew Research just put out, I should have had a clip of that, but there's always this stuff that I wish I had in the middle of it. But Pew Research put out this whole stupid thread on Twitter measuring 1 to 10 the different colors of Latinos. And there was even that thing recently with in the Washington Heights movie, they said that Lin-Manuel Miranda, whatever the name was made a big faux pas by not putting enough dark-skinned Latinos in the movie. And there is that level of type of racism within Mexico and within any sort of Latin country, where they really do look hard at the color of each other's skin and make social statuses based off of it. But So I was the HR director at a place that was 99% Latino. You know what I mean?
I was the 1%.
Yeah, and I was the other. And Flip's such a hard person for people to deal with because Flip's so multicultural. Like you've never met a person who's spent more time in Asian cuisine restaurants or Chinese markets or Latino markets or whatever, and can kind of like weave in and out of all of them and chit chat
I'm
with all of them.
I'm going this evening. I've got plans this evening to go with a friend to the Chinese supermarket because I'm all out of I'm all out of Zhatsai,
Yeah,
pickled
and
mustard
he's not just
stems.
going there buying ramen or something like that. Like
No, that's I mean the last time I went there, what I love about multiculturalism, which is what everybody else despises about it, because everything about this story is me culturally appropriating, racially profiling, just a million things. But I went into the store because I'm spending so much money on Sichuan dan dan noodles from a shop down the street that I'm like, well, I can cook. I need to learn how to make this myself. And so I'm going through the whole store, and the last thing I need, I found all the other things I need. I found my Shaoxing wine, and I found my light soy sauce, and all the special things, and my pickled mustard stem. The last thing I needed was raw peanuts. And there was an American worker in the store, and I said, "Hey, where are your raw peanuts?" And he takes me to the snack aisle where all the roasted, flavored, snacky peanuts are. And I'm like, "Oh, no, no, I mean raw peanuts." He's like, "I don't think we have raw peanuts." And he walked away, and I said to myself, like, I know better. Like, this is a Chinese market. There must be raw peanuts in here. And there was a Chinese worker, but the Chinese worker didn't speak my language, and I didn't speak hers, so that didn't go anywhere. And but then I had a thought because I think I saw some Mexicans over in produce. And if anybody here knows where the cacahuates crudos are, it'll be that guy. So I walked up to him. I racially profiled him. I said, "Hablas español?" He said, "Sí, claro." I said, "¿Dónde hay los cacahuates crudos?" He said, "Por allá." And he took me right there. And I learned Spanish on my own because I live in a country with 40 million Spanish speakers, and I just like having friends.
and you actually interact with them. And I mean, that's
Yeah.
going back to the luxury beliefs that Rob Henderson talks about. Even the New York Times will call these people out on it, and they say that. I mean, I think they did a whole podcast following up on people who in democratic communities talk about integration, and then how much as soon as it comes up to their doorstep they'll vote right against it. But
Oh yeah, no, and even more than that, like I mean, going back 10 years, that I used to have these gatherings, or my friends we would have bad movie nights, and and everybody always brings snacks, and my thing, because I'm that kind of guy, is that I would go to some weird place and bring something interesting and new from around the world,
mhm.
and there's one girl in particular who was also the wokest. They didn't have that word back then, but I remember she just said sometimes, like, I don't trust the stuff you bring. you know like, oh really? Like, and I mean, she said, I remember, I'll never forget it, because she said, I only eat good food. And my response was, well, I only read good books. like
Well,
but like it
beyond
was
the way she phrased it, I'll sympathize with her bit because Flip eats some weird stuff, man. But that's also because he really interacts with the culture, and I interact with him a lot too. But Flip Flip
no,
Flip really
it
does.
it's like a disease.
But
It's
Flip's even introduced me to a lot. Like you've introduced me to Ethiopian food, you've introduced me to Korean food, you've introduced me to all sorts of different stuff. Even though I didn't even know where these markets were, and Flip's taken me into a bunch of them. And
yeah, and that's the thing, is because I am so many ways I am living kryptonite to all of these ideas, because
yeah,
I don't do this. Like, this is the thing that makes me crazy. Again, like I mentioned in the last podcast, being lectured to about diversity from these people,
yeah,
because for them, diversity is like paying tithing.
yeah.
They think it's
And
a
and
service.
for us, we
Yeah,
think you're full of crap. And we hung out at this Latino party the other night that you guys would never end up at.
yeah.
You know,
Like,
and
I seek this stuff out not because I feel some moral impulse to learn more about the world. It's just built into me that I'm curious. Like,
yeah,
I say my bucket list is that I want to say hello in every language and eat one of everything.
it's being less of a virtue signaler and more just a human, and
Yeah,
interacting with people. And sometimes the way you get to meet these people and get to talk with them and become friends with them are by committing microaggressions. You know,
absolutely.
you ask them about some sort of clothing thing they have, you ask them about some sort of food they're eating, you ask them about something they've done with their hair, and they love to talk about it, and then you learn to it, and then you become a friend with them.
Well, like one of my games that total microaggression racist nightmare is when I see people's names. It's a game I play with myself. Is that I try to guess what the origin of the name is, and I'm quite good at it. Like the other day, I I
That's just
correctly as
Flip's, this is hard stuff because Flip's doing this in like the Asian world, and that's
no,
really
yeah, I saw
that's
a
a really
name.
hard world to do it in.
I saw a name and I said, "Is that Mongolian?" And the guy he smiled. He said, "Nobody figures that out." And I'm like, and I was happy. I did, I did a fist pump, but
Yeah.
but that's for me, like, I
Beyond
don't
hanging
know.
out, those Asian markets are coming and working to meet the Latino market. Flip's learning Arabic, and
Yeah,
he's constantly talking with those types of people, and he introduces me to a lot of it. I'm involved in a lot of multicultural stuff, partially just because I worked at those places. But I mean, I went to the Mexican mission, but my girlfriend is a Venezuelan refugee, and I live in Spanish. There was a couple years there where I was here in Utah, and I spoke very little English every single day for 2-3 years straight because I worked in Spanish and came home, and my life was in Spanish. But
but see, but we're white people, and now we're moving into brown spaces and trying to elevate ourselves.
and we're
By,
eroticizing it, and we're
yeah, you're definitely eroticizing it. Um,
you
I'm
eroticize it with food,
I'm
but
just getting, because the thing is, like, can't I just reverse that and say, like, well, what? How dare these Chinese people come to my country and entice me with their dan dan noodles? Because it's all
well, that's cultural
carbohydrates.
appropriation. All these types of like little slang concepts, like I said in the first thing, I think I can make a master's of slang concepts that take shits on liberal principles, but the concepts of like cultural appropriation and microaggressions are like perfectly designed type of like way to make people anxious about getting to know other people. It's like
Oh yeah.
the exact opposite of what you might do to actually create a melting pot. But melting pot's a dangerous world too. You need a
Well,
kaleidoscope
I
now.
mean, here's the thing.
We're
Like when
supposed to be a mosaic. We're supposed to be separate but together.
when that term microaggression came out and I first started to hear about it, this was one of those things like I mentioned with them, like with Lindsay and feminism, like when you start hearing terms like, victim blaming and stuff like that, and you go, oh, that happened to me. I had the same thing with microaggression, where, like, I learned, for example, it's a microaggression when somebody has a foreign name and you mispronounce it all the time. Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. Flip's
flip
name's not
isn't
Flip. Yeah.
Flip's not on my driver's license. It's not on my birth certificate. My name is not even hard to say, but I got so sick of people saying it wrong. And I mean, well, just talk. This is a conversation I had hundreds of times growing up. It would go exactly like this. Someone would come to me and say, "What's your name?" I would say, "Felipe." They say, "Felipe?" No, Felipe. And
Felipe.
they, "Oh, Felipe. How did you get a name like that?" And I say, "Well, I'm Brazilian." And the next thing out of their mouth would be, "Well, you don't look Brazilian." And it's just like, well, okay, you don't look Canadian. I don't know how you think the world works. And then that conversation went exactly like that 1,000 times. 50% of those conversations continued like this. So do you speak Spanish?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is like, so I know all about microaggressions. And let
Mm.
me tell you what I've learned about microaggressions. People who complain about microaggressions are assholes. Get over yourself.
Yeah.
Grow up. It
Yep.
stopped bothering me when I was a teenager, because I
Well,
realized I had this thought. I suddenly realized, why should Americans know anything about Brazil? Really, why should they? Why should they know any more about Brazil than they know about anything else in the world? What kind of asshole am I for holding it as like a moral failing of these people that they can't wrap their head around a Portuguese name? You
yeah.
know, like I arrived at that place as a child, and meanwhile we have 50-year-olds with college degrees crying about this very thing. Except that not in my
Luxury
case.
beliefs, luxury
Yeah,
beliefs. They're
luxury
just
belief.
signaling their status. They're that's my contention. That's Rob Henderson's contention. You know what I mean? But um, there's this weird. We talked about a dialectic happening just in church news this last week. For the first time ever, they kind of put this paper out that mentioned Quick's one of his recent videos talked about it, but it mentioned microaggressions and that you need to beware of microaggressions, and that we're trying to have a kaleidoscopic view of the whole concept of kaleidoscope that comes out of social justice. It comes out of this critical race theory world as well. That
Yeah.
the concept of the Canadian society of a mosaic, which is instead of the melting pot, which is what the U.S. always
Yeah,
had
that's
the
what I was just
concept
thinking about.
was.
Like, yeah, it's funny. It's like they're taking that exact concept and pathologizing it.
Yep,
You
we're
know?
supposed to be around each other, but separate little
Yeah.
tribes. But that's because most of this social justice world wants to view people as collectives rather than individuals, and get rid of the concept of a colorblind world or becoming intermarrying, and they even pathologize intermarrying. It's one of the reasons I mean, one of the areas I'll rage is there's some academic bullcrap about how me being like the people, Ryan Long's video about how the critical race theory people,
Real
the woke people and the race people agree on stuff, and one of those things they agree on is that I should not intermarry with a Venezuelan who's considered in Venezuela to be black, although Venezuela might be just completely out of this whole entire thing because they're not too up on liking Marxism. And so as soon as you don't like that, you're out of all of um your groups. But all the way back to the concept of I was the HR director at a place that was 99% Hispanic. I had work to do about racism. How did that happen?
Yeah.
They fought and interfought about between countries and even between races and said horrible, terrible things to each other about this stuff all the time.
And
And they
the
weren't allowed to
classism.
do it anymore in the US. And you'd have to tell them that, like, you can't do that in the US. Maybe you could do it in Mexico or something like that. You
The other
can't talk like that here in the US. And
the
it
other
was a
fun thing
learning
you
curve for
learn
them.
if you learn Spanish and make Mexican friends, something you learn very quickly is that if you want to hear people speak badly about illegal immigrants,
Yeah.
talk to legal Mexican immigrants.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Um, like that they got worse things to say than you can imagine.
Yep. And they know a lot more that going through that border ain't some little thing that you people with luxury beliefs want to paint it as.
Yeah.
But going all the way back, oh, not all the way back, but
Oh, real quick, talking about working with Mexicans, because then there's the reverse thing, where like for example, there's a whole bunch of Latin Americans, and not even Mexicans, just Latin Americans from all over, and one Ethiopian lady, and all of the Latin Americans called the Ethiopian lady Morena,
mhm.
Brownie,
Yeah, it's the nicknames they give to each other.
but it's a color based nickname. Now obviously, like, there's nothing racist about it, but like, now this is all happening in Spanish, so it's completely outside of the purview of you know the very smart critical race theorists.
Yeah.
But like, and when you tell them about this, like, well, explain to me how this how the native Peruvian woman
Yeah.
somehow internalized, like despite not knowing any English, somehow managed to internalize all of this American white supremacy to the point where she has the gall
And
to call her friend Brownie.
and all these people wanted not, maybe that's the reason they wanted into this country so bad, because this is the worstest, racistest, worstest country in the world, and they wanted to get where the getting was good, so that's why
Yeah,
they came here. But
that makes sense.
going all the way back to the other sort of thing, there is a subjective angle to him mentioning Japan, because Japan is one of the places that people who on the right want to make an argument for a very unified racial culture. They'll point to Japan a lot and
Yeah,
say, why can Japan be this way and not us? And then so some people on that cultural left have started jabbing at Japan. But John Larson, I bet you in private you might agree with us that Farrakhan is a racist, but live on this video you might hedge into the power plus privilege concept and say that black people cannot be racist because of that.
yeah.
I bet you would.
There's
You
always
wouldn't
some.
mind
I
reading.
mean, there's always some kind of hand waving. Like, if I mean, first you have to get them you have to nail them down and do the uh, Clockwork Orange with the eyes open, make them see what Farrakhan actually says.
Hmm.
First you have to get them to acknowledge what Farrakhan has said, and then you have to get them to acknowledge that it's racist, and then you have to get them to acknowledge that it's a form of racial ethno nationalism. You never even get there, but then if you do get there, it's the hand waving of power plus privilege and
I've seen you try to put people down that funnel and then
yeah,
just
no, they won't even
suck them
go.
out of it.
I mean,
But
that's I mean, again, it's an example of just how the very smart people, how disconnected they are. Is how many of my leftist friends who are the experts on race relations in America have no idea what the Nation of Islam believes. They really think that it's just like an
those
American branch of Islam.
Hebrew Israelites,
Yeah,
whatever.
the Black Hebrew nationalists, there's
Mhm.
Hebrew Zionists. There's a few of them. There's a Kwaku's mom was in one of those. Kwaku was raised in one of those things. The Moorish Science Temple. They're one of those.
Or even if you just go to some of those new left groups, like back that nobody ever seems to know about. Once again, I mentioned on the Midnight Mormons. I'll mention again here. Watch Ryan Chapman's video on the new left and learn about all those different Marxist groups from the '60s, like the Black Panthers or the Weather
Yeah,
Underground, and how into race integration they were or were not. Stokely
yeah,
Carmichael, but even these modern day critical race theorists like Derek Bell, Flip and I got into like an extended argument with somebody trying to be an apologist for that, saying that Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw were more careful to say systems not people, although I don't think they were, but I would grant them that they were more careful than the average regurgitator. But the problem is all the regurgitators come out and the
yeah,
regurgitators are not careful. Like, and I don't think Derek Bell was careful. I think he did come out and say that like even the lowest white man is a piece of crap and going to act like they're higher and superior
well,
to me. But they were a bit more careful about saying, just talking about the larger systems, more careful than these guys are. I've got some bunch of systems, not people crap pulled up. But then you get the average idiot who goes and starts and pushes this stuff into like new concept, anti old HR, anti Civil Rights Act of '64 HR race training things, and they get very sloppy about systems not people. They'll go right, and I'll even say like inside of academia, like the lower level, lower tier papers where somebody's like doing a critical race reading of Shakespeare or something like that, they absolutely fall away in 10 seconds about being careful about saying that, and will just go
yeah.
right into the pure exact racism of Farrakhan.
Well, it's like talking about breaking people's operant firmware, whatever it is that he uses. I've seen so many people turn into the blue screen of death. When you ask them, when you point out like, okay, it was far left critical race theorist types who tried to get the California constitutional amendment guaranteeing racial equality
that
removed.
said that you could not discriminate for
Yeah,
race and
they,
height.
they
They
wanted
they
they
wanted
wanted
rid of it.
they wanted to repeal the rule that says you cannot discriminate based on race. And you just ask the question, unless your plan was to discriminate based on race, what other motivation is there for that? And you watch their blue screen of death go.
You know the page on Kendi's book, don't you? Because you had somebody to say where it says
I don't
only answer
remember.
to present
The
discrimination or future
I
discrimination.
remember because I misquoted because I said solution and because I was thinking of Hitler. Weird how he makes me think of that. No, he says remedy instead of solution, but they're synonymous. But he says the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Which that's one of the things I always like to put to people is imagine Hitler saying that. Does it fit? Yes.
Well,
Like that's one of the things, like it's one of the things actually I would actually like to do as a podcast thing is, we could do this thing is like, was it Ibram Kendi or David Duke?
yeah.
Was
Well, I
it
mean, that's what they kind of James Lindsay and those guys kind of proved with those hoax papers, and then some people tried to claim that that single book, that single chapter of that book was the best chapter of that book, and he has a podcast of answering to that there's no good part of Mein Kampf, but he they made a feminist Mein Kampf paper and it got accepted into a journal, just replacing all those
it got called, quote, was an important contribution to
yeah,
knowledge.
yep. And
You
but
can't make it up.
this is one of the deals. Like you get like some sort of true believer with John or something, they'll hedge. Then you push them on it, and then the first little bit will be like, it doesn't say that, it doesn't say that, it doesn't say that, it doesn't say that. And then when you finally get them to admit that it does say that, or it is saying this thing over here, then they'll start going, yeah, but that's true. Yeah, but that's good. Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've been down the funnel enough times
It,
myself.
it's a
Like, it
or
was
the
like talking to a
yeah,
Scientologist,
yeah.
and they
No,
don't know
no, it's
about
not that.
Xenu, and you're telling them about Xenu, and there's no Xenu. Yeah, there's Xenu, and then
Yeah,
if they're gonna stay in it, they'll say, "Oh, yep, they're but Xenu's good. That Xenu stuff, Xenus are real."
yeah.
Um,
No, I mean, I had that exact thing with my brother. Inside of half an hour, like he started out saying critical race theory isn't real and it's a right wing conspiracy, and within 30 minutes, it's like, well, of course it's real and it's good, and I agree with it. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yep. I think there's just a little bit more of this clip.
And race. And once we realize that, then we can start like dealing with it and start dealing with people as peers. But the first thing we have to do is get rid of the religions that are built upon the idea that some cultures are inferior and need to have things taken away from them, or
What?
doing
Who
violence.
believes that?
What?
Who believes
It's
that?
built into the religion,
Who
but that.
says that? Who says that some cultures need to have they need to have taken away from them?
One of the things that I've thought of over the years is because stuff breaks down into tribalism, that I've thought that religion might have been one of the heuristics over time, one of the only ways that people can go about gelling together while eliminating race and eliminating nation.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things that transcends that. But of course, warring can happen inside religion too. So it's like you can never like beat it, because that will become tribal as well. But it did seem kind of like a good concept or idea of some sort of way where you could say both you and I are Catholics, so we're on the same team.
Yeah.
Although you're a black person from Africa, you're a Mexican, you're whatever. It's one
Yeah.
of the only concepts that does melt away race and nation.
And compared to their concept, which, like, for example, just kind of funny because, like, let's just take John Larson's summary of American civilization at face value. How the hell does the Civil War ever even happen? Like, because I mean, for the Confederates, okay, it makes sense. They wanted to preserve their white supremacist slave culture. But for the North, all you have to do is call it interest convergence. Like,
Yeah.
but like, I mean, this idea, like, I mean, this in John Larson's stupidly simplistic racial reading of American history, the Civil War makes no sense.
Yep.
Both either physical or to their culture is not okay. Not in the name of God, not in the name of anything. It's not okay.
Is it okay in the name of critical theories? Is it okay in the name of social justice? Is it okay in the name of racial justice? Is it okay in the name of ending all of those careers at BYU to save
I've
the
got
gay
that clip.
teens?
I've got that clip. Yeah.
I was just like, hell yeah, like, I mean, yeah, I guess I made my point.
Maybe would that be how it would
For sure. Yeah, that's what done.
But also, yeah, they're given lame excuses for why it's okay that people, like why it doesn't matter to them that people are critical.
Let's listen to this again now that we've seen it in action.
That's what critical race theory is all about. We could also say that it's a neo-Marxist strategy to make use of racial minorities to try to make way for a cultural revolution in America, just like Marcuse wrote in 1969 in his so-called Essay on Liberation. So that's another thing that critical race theory actually is. It is the attempt to use race to break open America for a communist-style revolution based now in equity rather than in pure communism. So critical race theory is pretty easy to understand. It's a belief system that believes that the ordinary state of affairs in our society is racism, that racism hides itself rather than gets better, has permanence to it, and it takes somebody called a critical race theorist to be able to find that racism, call it out, and hopefully bring us to a place where we can overthrow the entire system. It throws out the idea of step-by-step progress or incrementalism. It wants to overhaul the entire system in a social and cultural revolution that it's going to lead to bring us to a post-racial utopia that it hopes for. That's
So this is one of the areas that I think like the religious people are a little bit stunted in making this argument, but the ex-Mormon can make the argument for them, is that they've gotten incrementally better. A religious person's not allowed to talk about the increments,
Yeah.
although I think they should get into that line of apologetics, because I actually think Peterson makes the good arguments for that there is evolution inside of religion, and they're kind of intertwined with each other. But the religious people want to hold on to the line that they've had top-down authority. But I think even in their own theology, they could make an argument that it was a methodology towards improvement, not all the answers now, you know.
Yeah.
But that's hard for them to make that argument because so many of them want to keep it was all the answers now. But all the answers now are not. That religion, all Western religions have gotten incrementally better. The incrementalism is there. That's the liberal concept that I hold on to, is that the incrementalism is real. The concept of critical race theory hates. Nope. It was all just been to hide it. Interest convergence. Uh, there can only be revolution. We can only burn it down and start afresh, new, for the new future of greatness, which is, I argue, the angle of the whole Mormon Stories thing. But they do the interest convergence themselves, that they think they're the answer for the future now.
Yeah, totally.
But am I off base? That, I mean, that first part of Marxism I add in because it does come from a sort of Marxism, but the part where he starts going into seeing it in everything, and then you got to be woke and talk about it so you can burn down the old traditional past and that sort of stuff. Am I off base, or does that sound like?
No, I think it fits. It fits. I mean, if John Larson was willing to actually have a back and forth with us, maybe he could correct us, but and unless and until he wants to
I'm
answer critics.
I'm 100% sure, mind reading, but I'm sure that some of this stuff he would curb off on in a beer, over a beer, you know.
I
But
think
he
you're right.
could not curb off on it in public, because you can't agree that black people can be racist on the
Yeah.
podcast. You know what I mean? But I bet you he would over the
Well,
beer.
it's exactly like conversations Mormons have, together in the break room at work versus in the chapel, right? The things you can say about your faith at home are very different from the things you can say about your faith in testimony meeting. And when John Larson is on Mormon Stories, he's in testimony meeting.
Yeah, there's just too many possible donors. Even though he thinks he goes hard at donors in that BYU clip, which I have here somewhere. I think.
That's
Go ahead.
something, because I mean it's kind of an aside, but it's something that I've been curious about and I have no idea about. But because obviously for Mormon Stories, bringing John in has got to be a big draw.
Yeah.
And they also say that John isn't there out of charity; he's getting paid. They're Larson. And so it would be really interesting to see the numbers, because it's
Well, we looked at the numbers yesterday of what DeLynne's possibly getting paid, and it doesn't even kind of come close to giving us a full idea, as we know when we look at these 501c3.
well, because what I wonder is that, because let's not kid ourselves. John Larson is a much bigger draw than DeLynne, I think.
I don't know, because like there's been so many people. I thought that, but there's been so
Yeah?
many people that I've gone talking about this to lately, and they don't know who Larson is, and they do know who DeLynne is.
Do they know what Mormon Expression
They
was?
didn't. They didn't know what Mormon, like, even
Oh,
Jonathan Streeter didn't know what Mormon Expression was.
wow. I guess I'm pretty disconnected. But
Yeah,
I mean,
well, I think it was at that time. Like if the
yeah.
racehorse was at that time, John Larson was winning by far, because
Oh,
DeLynne was
yeah.
kind of doing the stay Mormon thing, and Larson had nothing but kind of shit to talk about DeLynne at that time. And I think I was there when they first met. I think I was. I think you were too. I think they first met at that University of Utah, like in person. I'm just
Oh,
going to talk
yeah.
about first at that University of Utah event that they had, because I remember John DeLynne coming in and he sat right in front of us, and he just sat there, and it was kind of like, "Whoa, John DeLynne's here!" Like he's over eyeing and stuff. But there was this whole concept through all the time that all those different podcasts at one point or another had the presence of John DeLynne come in, because he kind of made efforts to go around and try to bring them all in under his umbrella. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be the stake president. You guys can be bishops. You know what I mean? But and there's been a lot of arguments from like the Kate Kellys of the world, even Lindsay. I'm not going to say the stuff that she said to me in private about certain things, but I will just say that she definitely felt the concept of, like, she started her podcast, and then DeLynne came and said, "I'm going to come be a part of this and make it kind of part of me," you know. And I don't think that's telling too much out of school,
No, yeah. I mean,
because the stuff's come out. It's come out in other sorts of areas. But at the same time too, I'm not saying that like I have crazy amounts of information, of backdoor information of that stuff.
yeah.
All I do is I do know kind of the general things of, like, DeLynne trying to bring everything under the big umbrella, and then there was complaints that he wasn't being fair, in that he was just taking in all the money for himself. but I think we were there when DeLynn kind of came and was trying to do a bit of the same thing to Mormon expression and met him up. But I remember that time frame. Larson's like, "Oh, there's John DeLynn. Oh, I've only talked crap on that John DeLynn guy. This is awkward."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But DeLynn was just like there in his way of like, "Oh, I'm hearing John DeLynn. And I don't care," you know. But I mean, then they got along fine after that.
Well, I mean, that's kind of it's sort of interesting to see how they've like the two rivers have converged now, because yeah, at that time, like they were kind of
Well, I
they were
think Larson's crap that he talked on DeLynn would agree with that now, because most of the crap Larson talked about, it goes along
yeah
with some of these other clips I had, but Larson was like super against the stay Mormon concept.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's also I don't know, just to me, it's yet another piece of evidence that John DeLynn is really just cynical. Because I mean, and I'm not the first person to make the observation or the accusation that that when he was all stay Mormon, that he was doing that, for his own
He was doing the
advancement.
dialectic. Yeah.
Yeah, he was doing the dialectic, and then when it went the other way, he fully turned.
Well, we listened to that extended those claims by Rosebud just last night. I'd heard him before and looked at him, but
Yeah, I
last night
didn't.
we just listened to the whole entire thing. And beyond the whatever harassment complaints she had, some of the more interesting concepts were her claims about, and I've heard certain things that were similar from Lindsay Hansen Park, but his claims about being aware of wanting to become a martyr in his specified
Yeah,
way, and the optics of that, and how to bring stuff in and get ideas all together to build and create new un-Zion,
yeah.
and
No, that's what I think. Listen to that Rosebud
money,
thing.
the way they did the money. And
Yeah, like that's one of those things that kind of bugs me about the salacious nature of gossip is that like the the accusations of sexual impropriety are almost banal. Like it's the least interesting part of what Rosebud had to say about John DeLynn for me anyway.
yeah, I
Because
was
like,
more interested in other stuff too, but I do agree that when it comes to employed positions, especially as an HR guy, that there was
oh yeah,
problems there. I think they were banal in the sense of like sexual interaction,
yeah, yeah. No,
even
just the idea that like if you want to dig up dirt on somebody, the simplest thing in the world is to dig into their sexual past.
yeah,
Whereas like yeah, because like I mean again for me like I don't care about John DeLynn's private life. I care about ideas. I care
yeah.
about civilization. I
But
care about society, and that's so the stuff that is
there,
more relevant to me is how John DeLynn runs his operation and what his attitude is toward
I
what
agree
he's
it's less
doing.
interesting. The bone I'm throwing out is that people who do see that as a big deal, I'm not disagreeing with them.
No, yeah, no. If it's all true, I mean, because that's the other thing is I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all speculation, but
We're
like
into the
I
due
mean,
process thing, and
yeah.
that's one of my big issues with them is that I actually,
What
when that
and
whole thing happened on John DeLynn's page, I argued in plain sight for due process for him, and to not make any judgments until or have some further detail on this sort of thing. And then I remember like I said in the other podcast, somewhere around the Kavanaugh trials is where I started seeing through the bullshit on all this stuff. But I remember him doing this virtue signaling selfie of him about to watch the Kavanaugh trials and saying, "This is a great big moment for listening to women." And this was like weeks, or I don't know how long after I had defended his due process, and he was there jumping in the
yeah.
kangaroo court of Kavanaugh for his benefit. And that's like, that moment for me was one big moment. I thought he was a goobus before that, but that was like a big moment for me of being like, screw this guy.
My first blow up with Lindsay Park was over me going on. I don't know if it was her private page or the Feminist Mormon Housewives page, but on either one of them, she posted a big thing about John DeLynn, and I posted a thing in defense of due process. And
And she posted that after she initially defended due process.
yeah, and that's things like that was one of my first blow ups with the Feminist Mormon Housewives and all that community was their reaction to me saying like let due process happen, like and like and that's the thing is that, so the great irony is that it flips all the way around,
Yeah.
And like, and here I am like, well, there's actually plenty of evidence that something did happen, and he probably is a hypocrite.
Well,
And he,
I made the same point, and he actually thanked me for this point. I mean, I gotta dig it up, but like, when the Thomas S. Monson obituary came out in the New York Times, and it was just a complete smear job,
oh yeah.
I pointed out like this is some crap because like they gave like a glowing obituary to Castro, you know what I mean? And
What they
if they did it like talking about objectivity, like if they did it that way all the time, like got into people's dirt and positivity, or always stayed positive, like I wouldn't have shit to talk to them on saying the positive things about Castro if it was always positive.
yeah.
But they obviously smeared Monson, and so then I made the point, and I made an obituary of John DeLynn and said, "Here's John DeLynn." And I just listed off the bad concepts of John DeLynn, and he said,
Yeah.
"I see your point, Chris. It's a good point." But I the whole entire going back to the idea that I said, like there's a slogan for to shit on every single liberal process. One of those slogans is "listen and believe" over
Yeah.
due process.
Hashtag believe women.
Believe all women. It's a concept that is axiomatically stupid. Like obviously human beings can lie, and you should always be double checking any human, and it doesn't matter what genitalia they have. Does genitalia tell you if somebody's a woman or not? Man, I'm not very woke.
Uh-oh.
But it should be able to tell you if they can lie or not. So maybe if I called myself a woman now, I can be a non-liar or have access to truth, which is some of the metaphysical crap of all this philosophy that gets all wonky. But
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, well, just exactly that. They say, woman, being a woman, being black, it's what is the standpoint epistemology.
yeah,
Yeah, but then they go on and say like, well, it's subjective and it's a construct, and people can be one way and feel another, which makes them the other.
yeah. So all that,
Unless of course that's things like, of course we already know, like, because you and I can't just say we identify as women and then put hashtag believe women under this podcast and then call anybody who criticizes us a sexist who's trying to prop up the patriarchy,
yeah.
even though we
One of the problems too is like in my world of falsification and my own anecdotal experiences, I love it. Kind of like Mormons will start using the concept of like lived experience to talk back to them, and they'll kind of be like stuck like deer in the headlight whenever they bring that out. Like, how do we answer to that? And but in my lived experience, which is a bunch of different anecdotes, but I only need one to falsify this. I've caught some women in lies of
yeah.
harassment claim. I've had real life experience with that,
Well, that's my example I always keep bringing
where
up
they
is
admitted they lied too.
yeah, well, like, because I mean, these things like, women don't lie about rape. Uh, White cops are never punished for brutality. Black men never get off on self-defense. Like, these are all just like there are no transitional fossils.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the sense that, like, I think that most of the people who say there are no transitional fossils say that knowing that there is this big world of people talking about something called a transitional fossil, and like, but they've already thought their way out of why all of that's just bullshit and can be neglected. So the same thing happens when you talk about race in America, where they say, "Oh, this only happens to black people," and you just have to find the one example. Like, well, no, there's that one, and then like, but even if there's that one, they say, "Oh, no, 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 that one doesn't count because it's the systemic systems of systemic systems or whatever." But yeah, it is the exact same level of reality denial as there are no transitional fossils. Is women don't lie about rape. It's exactly that stupid.
Well, there's always some sort of time too where like maybe they'll initially start to pretend like they're gonna play with evidence. Like he'll talk about like the uh the water rights for the Native Americans, which all those sorts of things. I bet you if you look into it, there's going to be some sort of concepts that aren't so black and white. But to go to like with women don't lie about rape thing, they'll suddenly jump to numbers and say only 5% of there's only been like 3 to 5% of women who've been caught in lying about rape. And then you look into the stuff and think harder about it and say only 3 to 5% the other way have ever been convicted.
Yeah.
Everything else is the middle ground. It's gray middle ground, and no, like clear concepts of what actually happened, and he said, she said situations are very hard to decipher out. But I can also promise you something too. It's one of the concepts that people don't understand about trade-offs. It's one of Thomas Sowell's great things that people should listen to him about, is that you don't get utopia, you only get trade-offs. But one of the trade-offs that happens is, like, if you go changing on large scale levels any sort of incentive, like if the incentives start shifting, I agree that maybe in the past when there wasn't such an incentive to talk about being harassed at work, that it was probably pretty rare, more rare that people would lie about that. But the
Yeah.
incentive of that has changed. And the incentive, and there's still people who are totally telling 100% telling the truth. I know it. I've seen it happen. Um, there is absolutely a change in the incentive structure where people now know that there is opportunity, and when opportunity comes up a little bit, those percentages of what who's going to lie or not start
Yeah.
changing too.
Well, I mean, so to just look at family law in the West, America, Canada, Australia, England in particular. It's a common story, but and everybody knows how it works. But like for women, there's basically no downside to allege abuse.
Hmm.
Like there's no losing, only winning if you allege abuse if you're a woman. Like I mean, it's just that. There's no real mechanism. I mean, and I mean there is, but it's barely used. And then if it is, it's it doesn't. It's not effective. I mean, like just for example, a very common thing you'll see if you go on these groups and read the stories is, a guy will talk about how, they spent $3,000 in legal fees to get the judge to say to the wife, to the woman, you have to let you have to do your end of the custody, which means that you actually have to present the kids and make the children available and all this stuff. And so because you were so naughty and didn't do that, here's a $500 fine.
And then you
So
can go right
yeah,
back to doing it.
yeah. So it costs it costs the man $3,000, and that's the thing, is that $500 fine probably comes out of the child support. So like you're literally paying your own fine, and nothing literally changes. And that's the thing.
And then you
Talking
would
about
have to
systems of
do another $3,000 and go through the whole process again for the next time that they fudge on
That's
it.
fine, and it just keeps going. Because the thing is, no judge wants to be hard on women for
Mhm.
obvious women reasons, But anyway, like now, it's obvious to look at that and see the structuralized sexism, and you can even go through the history and see how the laws were written, how they were lobbied for, who lobbied for them, like, and you can draw that line directly to a particular political social movement in the '60s called feminism. Like, and that's the thing that makes me nuts is like, because I say all this, and I'm a personal victim of all this. Like, I'm a personal victim of systemized sexism, but I don't pretend that that is evidence that all of civilization is structured by women to benefit women at the expense of men. The world is more complicated than that. Now, that's the thing, is like, this is a real example of actual sexism being systematized into government, into justice.
It's also one of the areas that, like, people will talk crap on, like, men's rights activists or whatever, and there's different levels of that. But there's a we were talking the other time about there's people who are making their livings off of being these types of activists. But I can tell you right now, the person who's an activist to get this stuff changed in court, all they want is the stuff changed in court. They'll stop,
Yeah,
like, they'll stop their activism if the stuff gets corrected, you know?
yeah, exactly. No, I mean, 99% of what people think they know about men's rights activists is a smear from feminists. Like, it's really creepy to me. It's one of the things that's
I can tell.
more ridiculous and evil about what feminism has done, is because I mean, because like, and I'm not a men's rights activist. I'm not an activist of any kind.
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
one of the
I
last things I told Lindsay to look at in the last email I sent her is to look at that Cassie J documentary that got banned everywhere, but just
Yeah,
to realize that stuff's more complicated than. But I witnessed, as well as when Flip tried to make these points on the feminist site or Lindsay's site, that he got swarmed by a bunch of gnats sending him memes saying, "Oh, the male tears, all these bleeding
No,
hearts."
it's something Lindsay Park calls cyberbullying, and she says it's wrong.
Yeah, but yeah, he mentioned it. He talked about it. He was bringing up his real experience that I know personally has been a terrible experience
Yeah.
for him and
No,
his
no,
wife.
no, no, I mean,
And
that's
I saw swarms of people laughing and pointing and saying to him when he mentioned it.
yeah, no, because like the thing is, like if you start out just with the facts and data, they go, ah, facts and data, you don't know anything. So I'm like, I mean, this is one of the many times I've had this experience with feminism where like they teach you a concept, you use the concept as a male and find out that you were like the concept is true unless you use it. But like that thing's like, how about I tell you my lived experience
And not
and
only that,
go,
you can get ridiculed to the death of,
yeah, no,
of you having emotions. Hey, toxic masculinity, share your emotions. Share your emotions. You gotta show not that way. No, no.
um, I might have a screenshot of it somewhere, but it's like, I mean, I've I've received 10,000 evil replies
Mhm.
from feminists. But there's like a couple that stand out, and one of them, I think I've screenshotted it somewhere. Maybe I still have it, but it's something to the effect of like, like
You deserve it.
I no, it was somebody saying like, I don't consider my day complete until I've made a wife beater like you cry,
Yeah.
or something
I
like
remember
that,
a
where
bunch
it's
of
like,
memes like the male tears and the crying tears and all that sort of stuff. And these are the same people saying that toxic masculinity hurts everybody.
yeah, no, and that's the thing is like, and that was my final blow up with Lindsay. Is like, I mean, the final thing was I think it was the same one I just said. I hope she keeps your baby, and like all the while I'm being like I'm receiving this abuse. It is on Lindsay Park's private page. Her person not private, I don't know. I mean, I assume she has two pages. Her personal page, but you know what I mean, not the Feminist Mormon Housewives, but the one with her own name. It was on that page. And I'm like, and I know she knows what's going on there, but just to make sure, I'm screenshotting this stuff and privately messaging her saying, Lindsay, are you really okay with this? Will you please step in and say something? And
And she
she
said she
did.
doesn't.
And she did. You know what she did? She stepped in and slandered me. She doubled down on everything and publicly slandered me. That was her response. So that's, so much for feminist compassion.
What did she say right there?
It was a big thing. She said that I blame her personally for what my wife did, which is a fantasy. The only person I blame for what my wife did is my wife. I see, that's the thing, is like
Yeah, the simple
but
thing you were
but
saying is
but
here's an example of
yeah. Well, I mean, but there's more to it than this because it compounds the ironies. Because Lindsay said, specific, like the things that what I'm calling slander and what Lindsay owes me an apology for, and what I asked privately 3 times politely and once publicly, you need to apologize for this. She said that I blame her for what my wife did, and that I blame women generally for all my problems. Now, what's funny about that is it's the exact reverse
yeah.
of the foundational claim of intersectional feminism, which
I-
is that
ironclad law of woke projection.
the iron law of woke projection, which is funny because like Lindsay's actual position is that she is oppressed by men as a class,
Yeah.
and she turns that around and uses it as a smear against me, and it's not true. I don't blame again. The only person I blame for what my ex-wife did is my ex-wife. She's the only person responsible for what she did. Now she had an awful lot of help from the government, but that's a different part of the story. But the point is that
From the
yeah,
systemic systems.
yeah, the systemic systems of systemic systems of systemic
So
systems.
I had another quote about from wokeness somewhere. I didn't get pulled up, but one of the things about wokeness is like I can't remember what exact clip it is because they do a lot of like those little videos trying to explain different concepts. But one of the things that they do is they try to alter how you talk about stuff, and that brings us to this next clip
All right.
here. It's a short one.
The church authorities sleeping with women who are married to other men. Now, please, this is my reminder to ex-Mormons. Please, please, please stop saying that Joseph Smith slept with other men's wives.
Oh, this one.
Sexist construction. Stop it. Because these women were agents unto themselves and human beings who could make their own choices.
So maybe it wasn't so bad what they did.
Huh. That's a
The
sexist construction. It's okay. No, it's not. It's not a sexist.
exactly. It's just normal human talking interaction, but it is one of those things why I say it's woke. It's like it's stopping and doing an aside about something that's just kind of a very normal, common sense, hegemonic way of talking and pointing out the hegemony of the way we speak and trying to alter the view that everything is sexist, racist, homophobic, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember several years ago, I think he did kind of like always jump on these sort of feminist lines because I remember some years ago he had some sort of diatribe that you shouldn't say girls when you're talking about a woman, you know.
Oh
And I
my
watched
God.
and like it even kind of like because it'll come out of my mouth sometimes to this day where I'm like, oh, that's a girl I know, and then I'll go, oh, I remember that thing John Larson said that one time that's supposedly some sort of sexist way of talking, and I kind of hate all this stuff because there is a Hegelian dialectic. I've complained to you about it before, but that I'm so aware of all this stuff that they have Hegelian to me. You know, they have
Yeah.
brought me into double thinking all the bullshit all the time.
No, I like.
But no, saying that this girl's my friend over here is not me being sexist in any sort of way, shape, or form, you jackass.
Or ageist or anything else. Yeah, no, it does bother you how like you know, like the other day at work I put on Al Jolson, and then every song I'm like, oh, canceled. Oh, that's canceled. Oh, oh, sorry, Al Jolson, you are
Oh man,
done.
I can't watch Seinfeld anymore. We had your cousin was around and we talked about Seinfeld and I said, man, I can't watch Seinfeld anymore. And I wasn't even talking about woke stuff, but I was feeling depressed because it's like such a different time frame and that's not this time frame anymore. And then she immediately goes, yeah, because it's problematic. It's racist or something. And I was like, what? No, but yeah, when I watch Seinfeld, I see all the problematic things now. Thanks.
Yeah,
You know,
you
and
can't
I
stop
don't
yourself.
agree it's problematic, but I think you goofs, you can't help but get Hegelian into this to being I promise you, just like I pointed out to these guys back in 2011 that the movie The Help was woke, and it took several years later for Viola Davis to renounce her Oscar for it, you know, because of the exact reason that I described on Feminist Mormon Housewives that upset women there. But I I see the woke, you know, can I be, I disagree with this stuff, John, but can I be a woke person who can point it out to everybody, point out all the different areas where the language is a power game, it's a power discourse, it's a Fagodian power discourse.
Politics means power.
Well, I think when you go around trying to change people's language and talking, like some guy saying that asshole slept with my wife, don't talk like that. It's
Yeah.
you being a dickhead.
Wife is sexist. Mine is sexist.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
There's a Simpsons clip. I wish I had it. I'd probably get copyrighted for it, but like some professor was trying to date Marge, and this was back probably before things got super warped. But that professor did like a Homer sent Marge a letter saying "I miss you," and then he did like a Derridian breakdown of it. The professor saw it and like, look, he centers himself. I miss. You are the acted upon object. You're the acted upon object. You're something. You know, and he does this bullshit professorial breakdown. And my only point with all this is, John Larson, you woke. Shut up. You know?
Is there more?
There's a bunch more, but these ones are kind of more.
Okay.
I'll go in reverse order because like these ones are just kind of more him talking about the capitalism stuff. We can skip those ones and save it for another time. I think this
Yeah.
is the BYU clip.
Oh,
We'll end on the BYU clip.
yeah. This I couldn't believe what I was hearing.